book. I'm just going to control F for bolt. Wow, they do say bolt a lot.
Yeah, I'll say. I don't know if you read the book, but it's kind of the whole...
It's kind of a thing. What's good? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of The Newest Olympian. My name is Mike Schubert. I'm the titular Newest Olympian. I'm a grown man who never read the Percy Jackson books as a kid, but I read them as an adult because I was on a quest to determine if this was a book series that society has been sleeping on, and I said yes, and now we're continuing the quest to see if just everything has been slept on, but I think the show is helping wake up the world, and to cover this next episode of the show, I am joined by a very special guest because I'm never on this quest alone. I'm joined by someone who you have heard on the podcast, you may have seen competing in national ultimate frisbee tournaments. It is the best man at my wedding. It's Johnny Frohlichstein. Johnny, how is it going?
It is going so well. I'm still basking in the glow of the oatmeal chocolate chip banana dessert that Kelly baked for you and I yesterday. It was so delicious and I want some more of it, but I'm back in my house now and I'm sad that I can't get more of it.
Well, if you come over sometime soon, there will still be some left for you to munch on. So that will be a wonderful treat. Come on into town.
It was so delicious.
And also, I know recently you and Kelly had been doing your book exchange because you are both in deep rereads of Heroes of Olympus, or at least you're in your first read. Kelly's in her deep reread. And you two are having very fun text message conversations that I'm not allowed to be a part of.
Yeah, it's like strictly not for your eyes. I love Heroes of Olympus. It is so good. And I can't believe I didn't know about it until you started this whole podcast journey. And I'm so glad that I now do because I'm genuinely so excited for you to get to those books.
I'm as well. I'm very much excited to get into it, which won't be too long. We're doing the show, then we're going to put out the movie 2 episodes, then we'll cover the Lightning Thief musical, and then I think we're going to get right into Heroes of Olympus.
Oh, that's so exciting.
Very, very cool. Lots of exciting things. You and I are going to do a bunch of live shows in Florida. We'll get to finally do some Percy Jackson brackets.
Who knows what's going to happen?
It's wild stuff. Now, it's been a little bit since you've been on the podcast, but you have not yet answered the nectar and ambrosia question. So I turn it to you. What would your nectar and ambrosia taste like? Ideal food, ideal drink?
I think my nectar would be a very, very fresh cup of coffee with a very acidic roast. I just love black coffee that like punches you in the mouth. My ambrosia would be... I really, really debated this, but I have to go with the personal one. My mother makes a chocolate spice cake with marshmallow frosting for my birthday every year. And to this day, she still makes it and ships it to me in the mail.
Dedication.
And it is so delicious. She literally like packs up the cake part and puts the frosting in a little Tupperware. And I put it together. And if that isn't the most 30-year-old mama's boy thing you've ever heard, I don't know what is.
It's very cute. It's very adorable. And I'm going to be marking my calendars for late April so I can come through and happen to schedule a play date at your place. Oh, what's for dessert? Oh, okay.
I can't believe you haven't tried this yet. It's so good.
You know, I don't want to take it up with Carol, but I was at your house for 4 consecutive days once when we did a run of live shows, and she never made it.
And she owes you.
I saved both of your lives from a hornet that was inside of your house, or a wasp. I murdered a wasp. It was the manliest thing I've ever done in my life.
It was like the size of my head. And my mom and I were cowering in her bedroom. You puffed out your chest. It was so brave. And I was so impressed. And now that I know whenever I have a wasp in my house, I can just call you to take the hour-long train ride, and I will pay you whatever is necessary to come kill this wasp.
The best was that I'm not necessarily fond of bugs and wasps and stuff, and I can get a little spooked by it, but the two of you were so shaking in your boots that I recognized I need to be the one to step up. And yes, I had the wasp spray that kind of like shot out, like not even spray, it was just like liquid squirts, and I just hit him midair with a liquid squirt and he fell to the ground.
It was a one-shot snipe.
It might have been like my second or third. I think there was some residue spray on your floor, but yeah, it was a direct hit and I felt really cool. I felt very strong and powerful.
So yeah, my mom owes you a cake for that. All that is to say.
All that is to say, Mrs. Frohlichstein, please, when you're getting ready to send that delivery to Johnny, you might as well just send two. And one thing before we get into episode 7 is something that I wanted to say about episode 6, because I was reading through some of the nearby pages and my eyes glossed over the section about when Percy goes into the Santa Monica ocean and then talks with the Nereid. And I just found it fascinating that the book says something that Kelly pointed out when she and I watched episode 6 together. She said something to the effect of, is the Nereid supposed to sound like Sally? It kind of sounds like Sally. And there's a quote in book 6 when he hears the voice when he goes into the ocean. It says, quote, a woman's voice like my mother's called Percy Jackson. So whether the casting or something done to the audio effects was there, or maybe it was just happenstance, I just found it funny that Kelly asked a question that seems to be a book reference.
Yeah, wow. If not intentional, excellent happenstance.
Incredible stuff. So let's get into episode 7. It begins with them going into Krusty's waterbed store. And I found it very interesting because I think if you gave me a list of things that happen in the Lightning Thief book, what is not going to make the cut and get into the Lightning Thief season of the TV show, I would have thought Krusty's is out of here. But weirdly, I think Krusty's is in here because they seem to have decided that all of the DOA record stuff would have taken too much time, and the shorter way to get them into the underworld is to make the changes that they did and make Krusty's weirdly more important, but a shorter scene, but it's still shorter than what would have happened if they did the whole thing with DOA records and Charon and the lobby and all that kind of stuff.
It seems like the show has done a lot of this. Wouldn't Krusty's have been another case of like the kids being gullible and just like ending up somewhere they shouldn't because of that? It seems like the show has tended to write that out.
Yeah, so the book version of Krusty is that just random human kids like bully them in an alley. Like they're just wandering Santa Monica / Los Angeles for the entrance to the underworld because they don't know where it is. They just know it's in Santa Monica somewhere. So they're just walking around. A gang of hooligans gives them trouble, and then they run into Krusty's store to escape these kids. So I think it's a multi-part thing where they've taken away our team just wandering the streets of Los Angeles because it's got to be on a time crunch, even more so on a time crunch because the deadline has passed in the TV show versus the book where it hasn't passed yet. And then you can't do all this stuff with just like randomly finding it. But yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily a gullible thing. I think interestingly in the book, it's a reverse where it's kind of the first time where Percy picks up right away that something is going wrong, as opposed to the for sure gullible nature of Auntie M's and then the more naive nature of Echidna and the Arch. And then I just remember it being straight up, okay, yeah, something's wrong here. And then the Krusty's fight is pretty quick.
Yeah, I mean, I think the change makes a lot of sense, especially because obviously the meat of this episode is them in the underworld. Like, I don't know that it would have made a ton of sense, them aimlessly wandering around Santa Monica looking at tank top skateboarders and the like.
Yeah, so I think it's okay. Also, before we go any further, though, I did reference St. Louis. As St. Louis expert, how did you feel about the St. Louis representation? I've heard from multiple folks hitting me up on Instagram, some people with very detailed screenshots of where they were. All that stuff was filmed in Vancouver.
Yeah, I could tell there was some creative liberty taken with St. Louis. In particular, this was odd. There was one shot of the skyline where some of the buildings were not correct. Like they had sort of like somehow rendered it such that like some of the buildings I recognized, but some of them were either missing or incorrect. The shot was from the Illinois side across the river. And, you know, for example, you can see Busch Stadium where the Cardinals play. And I was like, where is it? And Busch Stadium was not there. So I think overall a solid portrayal. They had the courthouse, they had the green roof building, but I think a trained eye could notice some things missing.
Yeah, I feel like it was probably, if we're doing a CGI skyline, let's do the more simple buildings and let's for sure get the super iconic things. I feel like doing Busch Stadium would be tricky. I also wonder if they have to get the rights to Busch Stadium. I know that's a thing sometimes in video games where you have to pay the people who own the stadium for the image and likeness of the actual stadium and stuff like that. So I could see that being a thing. Yeah, like if you play NBA 2K, it doesn't call it Madison Square Garden. It just calls it like Knicks Arena because James Dolan, our owner, who's a terrible person, is like, you got to pay me money to use the name. It's so silly. So I wonder if that was a factor. They were like, we could save some money if we just don't include Busch Stadium and Johnny Frohlichstein and no one else will notice.
Yeah. I heard Billy Joel has a residence at Knicks Arena.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. He's setting that record, baby.
My hypothesis was actually that they didn't want to have a big alcohol ad in the kid show Percy Jackson.
Yeah, that's valid. That's
because it says Busch Stadium real big.
Yeah, that's true. At least it's not called like please drink Budweiser Arena, but yeah, you could put together the steps. I get that. But something that was really funny that someone pointed out to me on Instagram is that when Percy comes over the railing when he's wet after falling into the Mississippi, you can see bridges in the background, and someone who I guess is Canadian said, that's the bridge that you went over when you took the Amtrak train from Seattle to Vancouver for your live shows a couple months back.
Yeah, noted St. Louis bridge that connects Seattle and Vancouver.
Yeah, noted St. Louis bridge that would connect. Like, what do you, I guess there's probably a bridge that goes over the Mississippi at some point, just not that particular bridge.
Yeah, it'll take you into East St. Louis, which I think all of the stereotypes about St. Louis being dangerous emanate from East St. Louis. It's not exactly a place you want to hang out.
Well, now that East St. Louis has turned off the podcast, we can continue on. Thank you for this St. Louis insight. It's very important, and I'm glad that everyone can now hear all about the correct and incorrect vibes of the portrayal of St. Louis in Percy Jackson and the Olympians. Now we go into Krusty's. The vibe is spot on. The music, the fluorescent lighting, Krusty's outfit, and something that's interesting. Did you catch the casting decision for Krusty? Did he look familiar to you?
I had a feeling that he was familiar, but I didn't place anyone, so I figured it was just like generic actor guy. I will say, you mentioned Krusty's outfit. My first note that I wrote for this episode is Krusty's outfit is perfect. I want to be him for Halloween. It was so snazzy.
I am pretty sure in the Krusty episode of The Newest Olympian, whenever we got to that chapter, I said I wanted to dress as Krusty for Halloween. It's such a good outfit. It's such a great vibe. But the actor who plays Krusty in the TV show is the same actor who played Charon in the Lightning Thief movie.
Well, no wonder I didn't recognize him because I've blocked it from my brain.
Well, it's so funny because there's all these people clamoring, oh, you got to get Logan Lerman to be Poseidon. And I think he's fine, but I think Toby Stephens is doing a great job as Poseidon. And I also understand that Rick wanted to not have, he said, any crossover casting because he just wanted those to be separate. And I guess Charon is not necessarily a big role. It's not like they put in one of the more notable characters as a recast or something. But it is fascinating that they had the recasting in. So all the people who wanted recasting, it's like, look, you got it, right? This is who you wanted. But it is also funny because they've elevated Krusty in the show to the status of guardian of the secret entrance to the Underworld. So weirdly, having the guy who played Charon be Krusty, who sort of takes the place of what Charon does in the Lightning Thief book, is very funny.
Yeah, interesting point. He's not the same.
Yeah. And I looked stuff up because I needed a quicker turnaround on it because I didn't think about it until we were just getting ready to record. So I couldn't reach out to Dr. Moya or Red. But I quickly just sort of looked up the Krusty's myth to see, is there anything about him guarding a secret entrance to the Underworld? And all of my Googling yielded me with nothing. So this is, I think, a very rare instance of them putting something in the show that doesn't have like a mythological basis. And I know that's something that Rick always really likes to do. And he was bothered by the Lightning Thief movie giving the pearls to Persephone because Persephone doesn't have pearls. So I do find it interesting that they made a change and they made one that doesn't necessarily have a mythological reasoning. But I think that this is just an example of we just got to get this stuff in. There's so much to happen. And this episode's already like pushing 40 minutes, and it seems pretty clear that they don't want to go much longer than 40 minutes. So I think that this is just a true, we got to adapt it, and it's faster to do the Krusty thing than it is to do the DOA Records thing.
And I guess if I were to give a really generous reading, Krusty wasn't necessarily guarding the entrance. He might have just like stationed himself there because he knew that there'd be a lot of traffic and he wanted to get his victims or whatever. Like, he didn't seem like he was trying to prevent them from going to the underworld per se. Percy, I should say.
Nice. I just think Percy said something, and he is basically explaining whatever Hermes told him, because Percy goes in and he's just very straight up of I know who you are. You're Procrustes. You guard this, and you are someone who kills travelers, robs them, etc. So I don't know. I'm interested in the changes there, but I think that this is, of all the changes, the most like, we got to just do it change.
Yep.
So Percy's in. He knows the vibe right away. Mentions that Procrustes is the son of Poseidon, in addition to harming travelers. He knows the beds are a trap. So this, I think, would track with Sally telling Percy all of the stories of Greek mythology. And then Krusty just kind of ignores Percy's monologuing here. He does a little bit of referencing where he says, oh, you have dad's eyes and things like that. But he does have a great moment where he just smacks a waterbed, and you just get a great waterbed ripple. I don't know if you've ever laid on a waterbed. I feel like one of my relatives had a waterbed, and I always thought it was fascinating, but I don't know that I've ever slept on one, and I cannot imagine that it's a good night's sleep.
Yeah, when did they have their like heyday? I certainly waterbeds have fallen out of vogue now because it's gonna mess up your back if you sleep on it for longer than like 2 nights, right?
I want to say mid-90s. I want to say by the time I was getting old enough to recognize the silliness of waterbeds, they were gone.
Yeah, I have laid in a waterbed. My friend Ed, his mother had a waterbed, and I laid in it one time, and I mean, it's definitely fun, but it's like a toy, right? It's not like your bed. It's not like there's no like utility.
Yeah, I guess it was just the craze of, well, it's not springs, so it's better for you. Yeah, waterbed, wild. But the smack, fantastic. Then Krusty's doing his whole thing of, oh, you know, you'll fit in the bed, and kind of laying it on where if you know the myth, you know what he's talking about. And if you don't know the myth, you at least just feel like something bad is going on. And it's a good way of kids show, not necessarily saying like, you know, he chops off your head if you're too big and he stretches you out if you're too small. But Krusty is really trying to get Percy to try a bed, but then Percy kind of looks at him. And at first I thought Krusty was having some sort of Medusa magical power where he is able to convince them, because Percy kind of gives him a different look. But then he says, you first. And Annabeth takes off the hat and pushes him onto the bed, and then it wraps him up. Really cool moment. Love to see that they have tag teamed, because I feel like the Annabeth Percy tag team is something that works its way throughout the series. And this was really nice to see them not only do this with Medusa, but now again with Krusty. You get the brains and the brawn. It's nice.
To your point earlier about the Krusty scene not being like super critical in the books, I forgot how it was resolved. And so I was in the middle of typing a note that said, where are Grover and Annabeth? And I literally wrote A-N, and then Annabeth took off her hat, and I was like, oh, okay, there she is.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering that too when I was watching that, just very confused. Where are the other two? And then you realize Annabeth's been there the whole time, and Grover comes in because he didn't want to be a part of the gruesomeness. Maybe he thought they were going to chop his head off or something.
Yeah, that would have been a bit much.
Yeah, for the kids show, for sure. So after he's all wrapped up, they open a door, and this is the secret entrance to the underworld. Grover mentions that it smells like someone left a carton of milk in there since the 90s, saying it's either the underworld or it's that smell. And they talk about going in, and then you hear Krusty's from the other room saying, no one comes back. And then Annabeth says, dude, don't make me come back out there. Great. Love it. Fantastic banter.
I liked this because I just like that she's not just like a black actress who's just like acting like strictly white. Mm-hmm. It's not just like, oh, we've checked the box and cast a black actress. It's like she's, I don't know how to say this, but you know what I'm saying, right?
I know what you're saying, and it is an intentional thing that Rick in an interview said that like they had sensitivity writers and the casting choices did inform the characters a little bit. And I think that this is something we talked about earlier in the show, where the way that white guy Percy Jackson reacts to the police on the train is very different than people of color Aryan, Grover, and Leah, Annabeth. And I think that was intentional. And I think this is something, again, too. It is her being true to form, and it's not just her trying to act like the blonde white girl that was written in the book.
Right.
They are letting Leah's personality inform the character as well, and Leah's background. And I think that it's good. They're not trying to just...
You said it better than I could have.
Well, I only because I have discussed it multiple times and heard Rick himself discuss it as well.
Yeah.
So don't give me too much credit there. But yeah, you picked up on an intentional choice by the production team. So yes, I agree. I think it's good and it feels real. What is also real, but in the different sense, is that now we get the title that says Percy Jackson and the Olympians, and a show is getting real when it's towards the end of a season and you have like a 5-minute scene before you see the title. That's how you know it's real. It's like, we don't have to let you know at the top it's Percy Jackson and the Olympians. You know what it is. But at the first big transition moment, gloom, the title, and then they go into the Underworld. But before they go into the Underworld, we get the inclusion of a character I was so excited to see. We didn't get Darren in episode 6. We didn't see them purchase a big red ball from Waterland, but Annabeth grabs a tiny squeaky red ball because Grover is stressed out, uses it as a stress ball. But for anyone who's a book reader, you know exactly where this is headed.
In my mind, I was like, oh, they're going to the Underworld. Cerberus is there. This is like Chekhov's red stress ball. Like...
It was great to see. I knew exactly where that was headed. And I wonder if Annabeth at the time knew that they might use it for dog Cerberus stuff, or if it was purely just Grover stressed out. We got to give him something to fiddle with in the meantime. But I'm just really glad the red ball found its way in there. So then they make their way through the door into the Underworld, and we go back and we actually see the extension of the Subaru Outback flashback that we saw very briefly when Hermes touched Percy's forearm in the separate room in the Lotus Casino. Now we're going to see what that flashback actually was. And it's an interesting scene that never really takes place in the book, but it's something to kind of flesh out the relationship between Percy and Sally. They're dropping off Percy at a school, and I believe when it goes inside that this is Yancey. My understanding is that she's bringing him to Yancey, and then the person doesn't want to let Percy into Yancey, but then they eventually do. It's either that or they go to school A. School A doesn't let them in. They have to pivot and go to school B. And then that's what that scene in like the diner or restaurant is. What was your vibe on like post this awful meeting with this dude? Do you think that this was Yancey and then Sally found a way to convince this guy to keep Percy at Yancey?
Well, Percy looks quite a few years younger in the flashbacks, obviously, than he does currently.
Okay.
And I think that in the book, they describe him as like never lasting longer than a year at a given school. And so I imagine this is sort of just like stand-in school A and not necessarily Yancey because he bounced around so much when he was a kid.
Got it. Okay, yeah, that's a good call. I just thought that the principal's office or whatever looked very similar to the Yancey one, but maybe principal's offices just have a vibe, or maybe, wouldn't be surprised, it's like the same set and then they just moved things around a little bit because it was probably easy to film those scenes back to back.
That seems like the economical way to do it. The scene brought back some memories for me because when I was in the 7th grade, I had completed 1 year at Nipher Middle School, the public middle school in Kirkwood, Missouri, and
I'm sorry, Nipher?
Yeah.
Like Knifer?
It was spelled Nipher.
Oh, okay, that's way different.
It was way different. Pronunciation, still Nipher. So I completed 1 year. I hated it. I had a horrible experience because it was middle school and I was a nerdy growing boy.
7th grade is the worst year of everyone's life.
Completely.
It was 7th grade was the worst year of my life, hands down.
The worst is when you talk to the quote unquote popular kids about their 7th grade experience and they're like, oh, that was the worst year of my life. And I'm like, how?
Yeah.
You're the one making my year terrible.
That's the thing. The 7th grade, and I will always say this, that is at least in my school when popularity like became a real thing.
Right.
And at least in my school, it was class of 60 people. So up until 7th grade, when you had a birthday party, you just kind of invited everyone. There were 2 classes of 30 because they would split us in half. So like your birthday party would either be like everyone was invited or like the 30 people in your class were invited. And then, some people can't go or whatever. But then 7th grade was the beginning of I'm only inviting 12 people to my birthday party. And that sucked to learn that I was not as many people's friends as I thought I was.
Completely. Do you know what I mean, though? Have you ever had those people say to you, like, as adults, like, oh, 7th grade was the worst?
I don't know. I would have to ask because I didn't stay too much in touch with the folks who were super cool in 7th grade. but I will have to ask. I can ask one of my best friends that you know, Josh Pacifico, who was incredibly cool in 7th grade, but was still my best friend in 7th grade, which made it better and worse.
Yeah.
It made it really interesting to be best friends with the coolest kid in school. But then, like, if he was doing something, I would be there. But if he got invited to something, I would not. And then it would hurt more. Oh, it was tough. 7th grade sucked.
Gut punch. Josh Pacifico, still super cool.
He's super cool. But I don't know that he's ever complained about 7th grade, but I'll have to ask him about it.
Anyways, my mom took me to tour John Burroughs, which is a very like ritzy, private school.
I'm sorry, did you say Bomb Burroughs?
Yeah. No, John Burroughs. I think pretty much anyone famous that's come out of St. Louis went there, like John Hamm went there, among others.
Oh.
Anyways, she takes me to tour, and I don't know why, because I did not have a good experience at my public middle school, but for whatever reason, I was just like not about another change. I was like not willing to entertain the idea. And so we went on this tour, and I stayed like 50 feet from the tour guide the whole time, didn't ask a single question, like gave 1-word answers when they would go ask the tour group questions, and like was just so uninterested. And my mother, that's like the maddest she's ever been at me.
No cake on your birthday that year.
Exactly. You probably got the cake. So yeah, watching the scene, I was like, oh my gosh, Percy is just me at John Burroughs. I totally see this.
Yeah. So here's something I found interesting. Percy in the scene was a little bit brattier than I imagined. And Sally got a little bit angrier than I imagined. And I feel like this is something that makes more sense as the episode goes on, because I feel like it just is trying to amplify how hard this situation is. But it just felt like they were a little more animosity driven towards each other than I would have imagined. How did you feel? I didn't super love the vibe. Like, it felt too angry for me.
I agree with you. And when I was watching the scene, I was thinking about it. I don't think we've gotten a ton of Percy and his mom just like having fun. She's either been like teaching him something or angry with him, like in the swimming lesson.
We get the fun in the first episode when they race in on the count of 3, but they leave at 2, and you do the tap around the shoulder and you do some stuff like that. So there's a little bit, but yes, I agree. There's not like super great, oh, wow, everything's amazing, look at all the blue food I've cooked you vibes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think maybe if there was more of that, this scene would feel less out of place. But it seems like more than half of the Percy and his mom content has been like animosity driven, to your point. And I think that's probably why it feels weird.
Yeah, and I think what it does effectively is it just shows how hard this is for Sally, especially as the later scenes go on in this episode. I guess I just would have felt a little bit better if Sally didn't just like immediately resort to yelling. Like, I just didn't love the open the door, and maybe things were cut and maybe there was like a more gradual version and they had to trim it, but it just felt like she went from Percy's being grumpy and like, he was being a little bit of a brat, so like I kind of get it, but it just felt like a very quick escalation to like open this door. It's only about how it's going to be. But then it does relate to a line that Hades says later in the episode. So I feel like this scene serves a lot of purposes, but as far as just like the vibe, it wasn't my favorite. It just felt a little too intense for my liking.
Well, again, if I was watching the show not having read the books, I think my read of their relationship would probably be something to the effect of like, oh, it was pretty rocky growing up, you know?
Yeah.
I'm with you. It's a little bit much.
Yeah. So then we go back to the Underworld, which looks great. It looks really cool. And I think the best thing about it is that it is gray and hazy, not necessarily dark and black and exactly what any sort of stereotypical imagination of the Underworld would be. I think it looks really nice. And I always appreciate when things aren't super dark in a TV show. So this being not super dark made me happy.
Yeah, I think the Underworld looked great. I feel like there was more of like a journey in the Underworld than in the book. Like it seemed like in the book, it was like Charon brings them to Hades and not like, and obviously Cerberus they had to, work with, but like there wasn't this whole like trudging through the forest thing or across the desert or whatever.
Yeah, I kind of like that better because it feels like the TV show traded, we got to find the entrance to the Underworld, let's wander around. They swapped that with, okay, we're in the Underworld and now we got to find Hades' palace, which feels more legitimate that people aren't going to try to help them out.
Yep.
So I think that makes more sense. But Percy, when they're in there, says we're not in Kansas anymore, which was referenced earlier in the flashback. And Annabeth says, hey, focus, we left Kansas 4 days ago, which is very funny. And what makes it even funnier is that Percy tries to say, no, it's a, and he was going to say, no, it's a movie reference. But as we learned in episode 5, Annabeth has seen 0 films, which is a huge red flag for her parents. But I just like that he has to go, no, it's a, never mind.
The Annabeth has seen 0 films thing is definitely like a, oh yeah, she left when she was really young, sort of like character development point. But like, I watched a lot of movies before I was 7. Right. Maybe you already talked about this, but I watched a lot of movies.
It's truly wild. Like not one. The only thing is maybe, and I guess her dad is a big old nerd. Maybe it was a strict, like no screens at all household. Like all they did for fun was read the newspaper and play Parcheesi or whatever. Absolutely no fun can be had, but I kind of get it. I don't want to be a super screen heavy dad whenever that time comes.
One movie.
I feel like before 7 though, I don't think that's gonna like you gotta see Toy Story. Come on.
Yeah, I'd seen The Lion King 100 times before I was 7.
Yeah, look, it's very important that you know the story of Hamlet. But anyway, in the show, when they're in the underworld, now at this point I'm thinking, okay, because they mention Charon, I think. So I'm thinking, all right, are we going to get chocolate suit Charon? Because that's what I'm most invested in. Seeing the chocolate suit, the Italian well-crafted suit that they described in the book. That's all I'm looking for. So they are making their way through. They're pushing through a line. Percy says only suckers wait in line. And he says that Grover should spend more time with him in the city. I don't know. I still respect lines in New York City as long as they are legitimate lines. But there are situations where people line up, and by people I mean tourists. People will line up for things that don't need a line, and that is when you can either push your way through or walk around. Just sometimes it can get really annoying.
The other thing is when you're going into Broadway, there's like often 2 entrance lines, and the line on the side coming from Times Square is always like 2 blocks long, and then the line on the side coming from like Hell's Kitchen is like empty, and so you just go around and like skip the whole line.
You mean going into a Broadway show or like the Broadway subway station?
No, going into a Broadway show, because like there's 2 entrances to the show, or 2 lines, I mean, and everyone's just coming from Times Square, and so they all line up there, and then the line on the Hell's Kitchen side is literally always empty.
I guess it depends on the theater, because we just saw Sweeney Todd before beloved Josh Groban left as Mr. Todd. And we had to walk so far, like the line lapped around the whole sidewalk. So I guess it's just like a theater-based thing. But yeah, I do feel like some of them have multiple entrances. But good New York tip, Johnny. Very good New York tip.
Quick Sweeney Todd tangent. Mrs.
Please.
Lovett in that show was
she was so good.
Amazing. Oh,
yeah, I don't know that actress's name.
Annalee Ashford.
Thank you. It was also her final week. I think her and Groban were leaving at the same time. She knocked it out of the park. It was really good. And also a very funny thing is Kelly went to see it with me. She did not know the whole plot of Sweeney Todd. Her only exposure to Sweeney Todd was that they sing part of Sweeney Todd in The Office. Like I think Andy sings the Attend the Tale song at some point. And all she knew was, oh yeah, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street, and Andy sings it. She had confused it with Edward Scissorhands. So she thought that it was about this misunderstood barber who actually wasn't mean and didn't kill people and stuff. And then once all of the murders started happening on the stage, Kelly kept going like, oh my gosh, like every time it happened. And I turned to Kelly, I was like, Kelly, what did you expect? We're at Sweeney Todd. Like the whole thing is that he's the barber that kills people. And then afterwards she explained that. I was like, oh, so that's why you kept gasping every time he killed somebody.
Understandable confusion, given that Johnny Depp plays a scissor-related man in both Sweeney Todd and Edward Scissorhands.
Right, double Tim Burton, like we get it, yeah.
Last thing I'll say about Sweeney Todd, the original cast did a Tiny Desk concert. It's very, very good. Highly recommend it.
The original cast of this revival or the original?
Yeah, no. That's not an original cast at all. What am I saying? The cast of this revival.
The original cast of the revival. Yeah, the originating cast of the revival, I think might be the, something like that. But yeah, yes. But my dad did see the original Sweeney Todd.
Whoa.
With Angela Lansbury as Mrs. Lovett, which is incredible. That is so cool.
Iconic. Wow.
Yeah, my dad, I believe he still has it. He has a apron that is a Mrs. Lovett's pie shop apron that he would cook in sometimes.
I would wear that every time I cooked.
Joel B. Schubert, big Sweeney Todd guy. It's always been his favorite play, which is fun. I wouldn't necessarily clock him as a Sondheim guy, but maybe he just loved all the murder. Anyway, so they are in the underworld, and Charon does come up, and funnily enough, he is dressed almost identically as Charon in the Lightning Thief movie, which just devastated me. And I get it because of the vibe of the Underworld. You can't give him the nice chocolate brown Italian suit that he wears in the Lightning Thief book. I understand, because it would just be way too confusing for a very well-suited man to be in this very creepy setting. But man, I wanted it. Ever since I read it, I wanted it, and I'm sad that we don't get to see it. So I'll have to, I guess, read the graphic novel and see how that depiction is, because I want to see someone else's interpretation of it. And this is why I was always so excited to talk about how the TV show would do things, is because for certain things in the book, I see it in my brain, and I just want to see how someone else sees it in their brain, because I just find that fascinating. One of my favorite things is just I don't know, what is it? The theory, the thought process, the belief, the knowledge that there's no way to determine if two people see colors the same way. Like what I've called blue my whole life, you could see as orange, and we'll never know. And I love that.
I do too. It freaks me out a little bit. And you could say the same thing with sound too, right? In theory.
I guess.
The whole thing kind of wigs me out.
But we have this creepy Charon, and he says that they can't pass, they didn't pay, they didn't wait, like they don't deserve to be here. And then Percy tries to just give him all the drachmas to pay their way across because they want to see Hades. And then Charon is not taking it. He blows a whistle that has a very, very faint whistle, so it feels dog whistle-esque. But Percy, I guess, has never owned a pet and doesn't recognize what's happening. He says you can buy a new whistle, which is a great joke. And then Cerberus comes out and chases them. So on this wonderful cliffhanger, we can take our mid-roll break, unless you had something really quickly to say before we go to the lightning brief.
I understand the omission. I was sad that Charon didn't talk about the fact that he was underpaid.
Does that happen in the book?
Yeah, he talks about how he's underpaid and like hasn't gotten a raise in like 3 millennia or something.
Right. I think they just kind of had to take away the fun of Charon.
Yeah,
they had to take away the suit and the vibe, because that only works in the lobby of DOA Records. It doesn't work in the actual Underworld.
Totally.
You got to go with more traditional Charon. But yes, now we can take the lightning brief. Speaking of getting paid, where we'll talk, and it's more than just the ads and the Patreon stuff. I talk about updates with the show, such as the live shows you can see me and Johnny at. Come through. They're going to be very fun. They're very soon. Hello and welcome to the Lightning Brief Shubio edition. Just have a couple of quick updates for you. I mentioned a lot of this in the bonus episode I posted a couple of days ago, but just in case you missed that, here's the quicker version of those updates. Number one, merch is coming back in stock. That includes the beads, that includes the Camp Regular Person shirts, and that includes the My Other Pen is Riptide pen. All of those should arrive in my merch partner's warehouse at the end of the month, and then they'll start shipping those out. So if you ordered beads recently, that was a pre-order situation, so those should be sent out soon, and then we will have a restock in many of the sizes of the shirts and then the pens by the end of the month. So head on over to thenewsolympian.com/merch if you want to place those orders. Also, we've got live shows on the horizon. We have a new show added in Denver because you wonderful Colorado folk sold out the first show. That is super cool. That is awesome. There's a lot of tickets and we sold out the show. That's fantastic. And because of that, we added an early show on the same day. So February 18th now at 4:30 p.m., we will have another show that is half TNO, half Potterless. It will be different content from the late show. So if you are already going to the late show and you want to spend the whole Sunday with me and some friends, come on through. It'll be a fun time. You can make new friends. You can bring your friends. You can go to the first show. You can grab a bite to eat, then come to the second show. It'll be a blast. The content will be different, so you can enjoy both shows. Now, we also have shows coming up in Florida, Gainesville, Tampa, and Orlando on February 8th, 9th, and 10th. The guest for those is Johnny Frohlichstein. We have set what we will be talking about in those shows. There are going to be some fun brackets for the TNO portions. If you go to our Instagram page at Newest Olympian, you can see what those shows will be about. And similarly, every show will be different. So if you want to do all these drives and come to all 3 Florida shows, you can. Each night will be different. And then beyond that, we've got a Phoenix show on February 20th. That is just the Newest Olympian. And then we've got half TNO, half Potterless shows in Raleigh on March 9th and Charlotte on March 10th. I will say the Raleigh show is selling pretty quickly. So if you want to get in on that, I would get in on that. But tickets for all of those shows live at thenewsolympian.com/live. The next thing posted on the feed will be this coming Monday. It'll be a double interview, episode 1 with Joel Rochester, who you've heard on the podcast before. He was able to attend the UK premiere, so I'm going to talk to him about what that's like. And then we also have an interview with a cast member, someone who did feature heavily in episode 7, and I will say someone who is tiny and adorable. So if you can guess who that is, it might be pretty easy. It's Azrael who played young Percy. I'm going to be interviewing him, and that'll be on Monday. So keep your eyes out for when that hits the feed. And for some other content, just make sure you are checking out the News Olympian Instagram and Twitter. I'm posting some fun stuff from some of these interviews. I'm going to be posting like Instagram reels and a new collaboration with someone that is very different from things I've done before. Lots of fun stuff coming. Check that out. Now, speaking of fun stuff and cool people, I want to thank the folks who have joined the Patreon recently. I'm very appreciative to everyone who supports the show on Patreon. That is very cool. Anyone who has ever supported, that is super cool. And if you're considering supporting, I gotta say it's pretty sweet. We got a whole bunch of fun bonus content on the Patreon that you get access to immediately. There's also some fun physical exclusive merch rewards that you can get, such as Perseolator pins and Perseolator stickers. The only Perseolator stuff lives at the Patreon. But I want to give a shout out to the folks who have joined most recently. So shout out to our newest Super God tier patron, Half Blood of Coffee. Shout out to our newest God tier patrons, Your Friendly Neighborhood Seaweed Brain, Jessica Guerrero, Ethan Chilton, Iana, and Morgan Corey McKeon. And shout out to our newest Demigod tier patrons, Per Slay, Rachel Davies, Amy Shu, Victoria Green Armitage, Bex, Jakin Shelton, and Max Hicken. Thank you all so much for support. May Morpheus bless you that when you have a cool dream, you can remember the cool dream, or if you have that thing when you wake up from a cool dream and you try to go back to sleep and go back into the dream, you successfully return to the cool dream. If you're all caught up in the News Olympian and you're looking for a new podcast to listen to, well, you are in luck. I'm an independent podcast boy, and I make a whole bunch of podcasts, and I'm very biased, but I think they're very good, and I bet you'll like them. If you want to listen to one that is very fun, but slightly different from the News Olympian, there's a fun show that I made one season of so far called Modern Muckraker. Modern Muckraker is a scripted show that I worked on with a wonderful team. I was the host, and I played the character of someone who's doing what he believes to be the most important investigative journalism ever, but really the questions we're answering are very silly, such as, when should Spider-Man take the subway instead of web swinging? And if you lost half of an orchestra, what remaining instruments would make the worst possible sound? If you have enjoyed the deep dive Instagram reels I've been making on the News Olympian account, you will love this podcast. You can listen to wherever you get your podcasts by searching for Modern Muckraker or by going to our website, modernmuck.com. Now, before we wrap up here, you're going to hear words from a few sponsors make it feasible for me to be a full-time podcaster. Some of those ads will be read by me. Others of them won't. The ones that aren't read by me are inserted locally. So if you live in Mozambique, don't be surprised if you hear an ad in Portuguese, because at least according to the internet, that's the official language of Mozambique. But once those ads are complete, we'll get back to this episode of the News Olympian. And we are back. Our team is getting chased by Cerberus, and it's not going well because one of the heads just scoops up Grover. So, man, RIP to Grover. You had a good run. But then eventually, Annabeth tells Percy a direction to go. They split up, and then we see that Annabeth has sort of tamed Cerberus because she's up on his collar, giving him some well-timed, well-placed scratches. And I love that Cerberus is just a pup, just a doggo. That's one of my favorite things about Hades, the video game. Just Cerberus is just a dog. And I like that they've carried over the vibe from Cerberus in the book, which is, yes, Cerberus is scary, but also Cerberus is just a pup.
There's one point where he lays one of his heads on top of another one of his heads, and it was the cutest thing I've ever seen.
I noticed that too, and it was really, really cute. I liked that quite a bit. So then when the dog gets a bit sleepier, Grover does crawl out and say that the dog is a bad dog. You know Grover had to be upset if he was saying a mean thing to an animal. And then we have a bit of the planning showing from Annabeth, because she does a maneuver where she throws the squeaky ball up after Grover flies Percy up onto a ridge, and she does that in a way where Percy catches the ball and then Cerberus tries to go up and take a chomp at them. But then Annabeth, since she was on the collar, uses that as a way to get up the ledge. Really smart. I like that we see that Annabeth has that Athena wisdom planning. She truly is a wise girl.
Yeah, I'll say. I'm hung up on the fact that Grover called Cerberus a bad dog because he forgot the simple fact that there are no bad dogs.
Yes, I mean, you are saying this is the owner of a dog who you have called a tyrant, I believe, before.
Yeah, and some more colorful words that aren't allowed on this podcast.
So they are making their way to Hades' palace, which they can see, and it's just upside down. And at first I was wondering, is it going to be a gravity switch situation? But then when they do eventually get there, it's just built upside down, which is really cool.
It's built different.
It is built different. Yes, it is. So we do learn along the way that Grover lost the pearl, which is bad. Percy takes it in stride, though. Grover says someone's going to have to be left behind. And Percy says, it's not going to be you. We're going to figure it out. Going back to, I believe, Book Percy's original thing, which is, we're just going to kind of convince Hades that he should let my mom go, and we'll see how that goes.
I love this change because I think it's a great character development point for Percy giving Grover a second pearl after he loses his first one. I think that's so much better than them only getting 3 in the first place.
Yeah, I think the 4 pearls thing has multiple reasons for existing. I think the 4 pearls thing is part to make Poseidon look better, because the whole thing was they were intentionally going to see Poseidon. He left because the deadline passed. Nereid says, your father left you these, and has 4. If the Nereid only gave them 3, that would have been wild. It would have made Poseidon look like a jerk. So I feel like that's a change because they made the seeing Poseidon like a direct thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then, yes, it does also give this extra moment of showing Percy is a good guy and a good friend, because it really just is more of like an argument that they kind of have when they get to Hades' palace, that someone's going to have to be left behind. But yeah, I think it's nice. I'm intrigued about the change of it, but I think it's doing a couple of different things here, and I think it's fine. And I really hope no one has a serious gripe with there being 4 pearls instead of 3, because it truly feels quite minor, but that it does do some nice things. I do worry that they are making Poseidon like a little too nice and lovable, but we'll see how the whole show finishes out with episode 8.
Yeah, if someone had an issue with that, that would just be like someone trying not to like the show and just like poking around for differences, because that would, yeah, that's silly.
I think there are some people out there like that. I've seen some videos that folks have sent me where people are complaining about stuff, and it's just like, there's just some things where it's like, this is a TV show. Like, there's just some complaints where it's like, you can't do that. You can't do that. Like, someone sent me a video and it was this guy being like, oh, Percy's not figuring anything out. Like, we aren't seeing Percy, put things together in his head. And I think that that video no longer has relevance, because Percy definitely does that in this episode. But also, that's a first person narrated. Like, we can't have Percy doing the beautiful mind, seeing all of the calculations every single time. Like, it is a TV show. What are you talking about?
I don't think you've ever seen the television program Jimmy Neutron, in which he has literal praying blasts.
Yes, highly lauded television program, Jimmy Neutron.
That's right.
Jeepers creepers. So, yeah, I think there's certain things like you just can't. It's a TV show. You got to just take it in stride. But anyway, before they continue on more through the Underworld, we go back to this Sally Percy flashback. And Sally's in a meeting with whoever's running the school. And this person says that they had to reconsider Percy's application because of something that came to light. And what came to light was a drawing. And we saw this drawing earlier. And this was the whole seeing the Pegasus, seeing being on the roof, all that kind of stuff. It is wild to me that they didn't call or email. Like, Sally drove all the way. She says it's an hour outside of the city. And then they have to get there and learn that Percy can't go into school. That is so rude. Like, cover the gas money. That's 2+ hours of my life that I've just lost. Are you kidding me? The traffic's going to be way worse going back into the city. What is this?
It's like in The Dark Knight when they go all the way to China and then just to tell that one guy that the business deal's off, and in reality they're going because they want to like kidnap him or whatever. And he's like, a simple phone call would have sufficed.
Right, yeah. I mean, I guess this is pre-lockdown, or I mean that in particular. But like, this could have been an email. This could have been a phone call. That's wild. But I also get it's a TV show and they have to have this dramatic thing. But also what makes no sense is that this dude is having a meeting with Sally where they are being quite rude to Percy Jackson while he is clearly within earshot. And the door is just open to the office. They don't close the door. Percy just has to hear all of this. Again, I get it's a TV show and you have to hear blah, blah, blah. But wild decision. I hope Percy didn't actually attend this school. I hope it is a thing where he goes to another school, because it is just so poorly run. 2 strikes back to back. What is happening?
I also have to say, What a low bar for not letting someone in your school because he drew a Pegasus. Like, this is just a kid with a lively imagination. Come on.
Yeah. I guess the guy's justification was that he then went on the roof to try to see the Pegasus, which is more of a concern. But also, why was the door to the roof open? Previous school of Percy Jackson? Why is that not a locked door?
Blame systems, not individuals.
Unless this is a situation like in High School Musical where they have the rooftop garden for kids to go and sing about their feelings. But I don't think that that's that. So how come Percy just has access to the roof? That's wild. That's a problem with the school. But even worse is that this dude at this school basically tells Sally, you should just homeschool your kid. Like, that's a valid thing. It's just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, single parent homeschooling her son. That's definitely
That's gonna fly, where the dad is off being the god of the sea and the stepdad is off losing at imaginary poker. So we go back to the Underworld. Our team runs into a creepy, very stoic, stationary lady. And we learn that the way that they have done the Fields of Asphodel in the show is that it's more of the forests of Asphodel, because basically people get tied up in roots based on regrets, and then they stay stationary, and then they eventually turn into a tree. I like this. I wonder if this is something that is a different mythological interpretation of the Fields of Asphodel. If it's a myth, cool. If it's not a myth, whoever came up with this, it's fascinating. I think it's a huge improvement. I love it.
I imagine, though, for you, it was a little jarring as someone who probably only knew Asphodel from Hades the video game, because it was very different from the Hades the video game Asphodel.
Yes, Asphodel, Hades, big lava town. And then for Percy, I always just imagined it as like one of those big open fields, like when you're driving through the Midwest in America, like big hay cornfield kind of vibe, but just black, like everything black and dark. So I like this, though. I think this is a cool vibe.
Nothing more beautiful than sunset when you're driving through central Illinois looking at the cornfields. My goodness.
Oh, what's that? East St. Louis has resumed the episode? Wow. So Annabeth then gets stuck, and the reasoning is that she has some sort of regret. What do you think her regret is? Do you think it's something recent? Do you think it's like the Luke thing from way back? Do we think it's Thalia related? I really wonder if this is something that's going to come up later, or if I was being a dunce and it was something that already happened. I feel like she doesn't have any big regret based on stuff that's happened in the season. So I wonder if like later down the road, when we learn about some of the other things, that will be her regret.
I mean, the only thing I can think of is like something with Thalia in the tree, right? Not like preventing her from becoming the tree or whatever, because like she and Luke got to camp and remained close. Like, it's not like she has any Luke related regrets yet.
Right. And I don't think that it would be a rehash of the arch thing from earlier in the season, because I feel like we've discussed that and it's over. And she's already gone past it with the Hephaestus chair thing. Like, she has embraced not really worrying about that anymore. So I don't think it's that. I bet this is going to come up later in a future season of the show. That's my guess.
Yep.
She says that she trusts Percy's dad. And I think that's really cool, is she has gone the next step, getting over the Athena Poseidon beef and trusting that this pearl is going to save them. It's very cool. So Grover and Percy move on. She uses the pearl and she says she's going to distract the dog because Cerberus is still chasing them. So they're moving on, and then they get into a very sandy area, which we recognize as the viewer that that's Tartarus because of the dreams that Percy's had before with the pit and everything. Then, of course, the shoes activate and Grover can't control how he's walking. They're flying towards the pit, and then Percy does the thing where he stabs Riptide into the ground, and then they grab and the shoes fly off. And then when Percy is feeling relieved, he lays back on his backpack, but then they hear a big thud, and then they realize that the Master Bolt, which looks super cool, is in the backpack. I love the vibe of the Master Bolt.
So I think this whole scene was excellent. Like, maybe one of my favorite scenes in the show so far. I think it was perfectly done. Agree with you on the Master Bolt. I think in the book, it was just like sort of looked like a huge battery. And so I'm glad that they changed the vibe of it and made it a little more bolty.
Yeah, I would have to look back on the description of it in the book, but in my brain, it was more electric-y and less like a bronze thing that you would use to form electricity out of, like less like the whole thing looks like a bolt.
I thought it was like a big black cylinder, basically, that was just like charged.
Oh, interesting. So here's the quote from the book. It says, "A horrible feeling struck me, the weight in my backpack like a bowling ball. It couldn't be. I slung it off my shoulder and unzipped it. Inside was a 2-foot long metal cylinder, spiked on both ends." humming with energy. Okay. So yeah, less bolty and more just simple. So this one is definitely more intricate, but I do really like the design. I think it's very cool.
I was really worried after this scene that Grover was going to say, like, didn't Luke give you those shoes? And they were just going to spell it out. And I'm glad that they holstered that because it really seemed like one of them was going to say it.
Yeah, I think the show has made a very intentional choice to make the Luke thing almost like an unfair, unguessable plot twist.
Yes.
And I'm intrigued to see how the reveal goes down in episode 8. I feel like in the book you had more hints where you've got the Nereid saying, don't trust the gifts, and Luke being a little more suspicious during the Iris message call. But even the book like mostly hit it, except for the don't trust the gifts thing, which is pretty obvious since he'd only been given 2 gifts. I think the show's doing a very intentional job of hiding it. And yes, I'm glad that they're just kind of leaving that to be a thing. I think it's okay, even if it's like a quote unquote unfair plot twist, because there's so many other things to cover that just so be it. You know, it's okay if they're like maybe pulling one over on us.
Yeah, of course. I was impressed they didn't even say like, oh, the shoes must have been activated by Tartarus or whatever, right? It was just like, the only clues you have are what you saw.
Right. I don't even know if the team puts it together until later on.
Right.
I feel like they just think it's a weird thing. They don't necessarily say like the shoes were bad, thus Luke is bad. But yeah. So the bolt has been discovered. Grover and Percy are so worried about this that they talk over each other, which is a rare thing to see in a TV show, like 2 people talking at the same time. But I think it works for the situation that they're just both so freaked out. And then after this scene, we go back to the Percy and Sally flashback. And now they are at some sort of diner, restaurant, something. And Sally has gotten Percy an apology ice cream sundae. It is very tall and intricate. And she's trying to convince him that he's going to have a good time at this school. And then Percy does raise a valid concern that I think is something that I didn't think about too much before he said it, which is, why are you trying to get rid of me so badly? And I thought, okay, yeah, that is interesting. Why does Sally try to get rid of him? She does explain it in a little bit. And maybe this was explained in the book too, and I forgot. But then Percy, after making a very good point, makes a point that is not as valid, where he says, I would never do this to you. I'm sorry, Percy, you're 8. She's your mom. She's got to work. This is how the world works, my guy. It's not a fair assessment.
I would never bring you to a school and make you go there, mother.
Oh my goodness.
The whole scene, I was just thinking to myself, so are you going to eat that sundae or?
Yeah. I mean, it's just one of those things. They didn't eat the food at the diner and they didn't eat the food here. I just know that when you eat food on something filmed, it's so much more work. It is so much more work for the continuity and all of that I'm sure it was just easier for them not to deal with that. But yeah, it did look very tasty and untouched.
It worked for the scene, right? Because I think it was Percy sort of like rejecting the apology sundae, basically.
Yeah, I think it does work. I think it does work for sure. But it's also reminiscent of the earlier flashback where young Percy, when Sally is frustrated with him in the swimming lesson, where he goes, just breathe, mommy. So Percy does track to treat Sally as an equal, which I think is kind of fun. And it is one of those things where it's like, it's frustrating, but also cute to have your kid kind of turn the tables on you when the situation isn't super fair. But I like it. I think it does just kind of get to Percy's impertinence, his impertinence, if you will, that does come up in the show. I think it's valid.
I'm just glad he's not one of those kids that calls his parent by her first name, though.
Oh, like I do?
That would be a bridge too far.
Or, well, yeah, at a young
different.
age.
You didn't do that. Yeah.
Right. I mean, for me, it was really accelerated. And this is something that does come up on, I guess, like social media for the podcast and stuff. Sometimes people ask, like, isn't it really weird that Mike always calls his mom and dad Barb and Joel? It's like, it was something that I would switch between sometimes saying it. I feel like if I'm talking to them just directly, I will call them mom and dad. But if I'm like talking to my friends about them, it's weird to be like, my mom. I don't know. I'm an adult. And I also do just kind of view them as my peers. But also on the podcast, like it felt weird on a podcast to be like, my mom and my dad. So I think that kind of accelerated it. But I do like the listeners out there who think I'm a monster because how dare I disrespect my parents by calling them by their names.
Calling them by their names to them is very, very different. But yeah, I called my mom Carol to my friends, like even in high school. Like, then they would call her Carol.
Yeah, I think the worst thing though is when you're a kid and your friend's mom insists, no, call me Rebecca or something like that because they don't want to feel old or whatever. It's like, I'm sorry, Mrs. Johnston. I'm 7. I'm going to call you Mrs. Johnston. Like, I can't change this. So back to the Underworld. They go in. This is where we learn that the palace of Hades is built upside down. And then Hades comes in. He's a very fast walker. He's got loud shoes. He's very quickly walking. I appreciate it. But you just hear the like clunk, clunk, clunk.
I had the same reaction. And I was like, is this just going to be weird when they show him and he's not walking this fast? Because like no one can walk this fast. And then there he was walking this fast. I was like, whoa.
As a fast walker, I appreciate this. I love how fast he was walking. He's got a place to be. He's walking fast. And overall, I love his vibe. Obviously, he's not Stanley Tucci, my dream casting for Hades. But this guy nails exactly the vibe that I was imagining when I read the book, is that it's more of a sassier, grumpier, not the Hades you would expect Hades. And I like that he is just upset at the situation and just like he just feels like impatient about all of this. And I like it. I think it's very good. I liked the vibe that they did for Hades, especially because the books kind of establish the whole thing. He's the big red herring of, oh, it's got to be him. He's so evil. And then especially this rendition in the TV show you're watching, you're like, this guy seems fine, if not nice. What's going on?
Yeah, I really liked it too. I think they did the reveal very well that he was not part of the scheme, where he's like, yeah, give it back. And you're like, oh yeah, he's asking about the lightning bolt. And then he's like, what are you talking about? What do you mean Ares? Like, I just want my Helm of Darkness back. It was like, I think that was very, very like clear. And I think that like that's a plot point that could sort of get easily lost if it was like mumbled or just like brushed over. But I felt like if I was watching this as a non-book reader, I would have like completely followed it.
Yeah. There was also a really funny moment at the beginning when he welcomes them in and offers them a drink. Do you want pomegranate juice or a snack? The one fun thing about doing the pomegranate juice is it's a great little line that would just make any mythology nerd scream, no, at the TV. And then the snack thing, Grover is about to say yes. And then Percy just goes, we want my mom. It's so good. It's so funny.
You know, Poseidon thinks your mom is a snack, Percy.
But speaking of Poseidon-related jokes, he does tell Percy, I like the cut of your jib, and it goes completely over Percy's head as a nautical reference. So funny. I love that. And this will be me as an adult making jokes to kids if they don't get them. Like, I'll be making puns, and then if they don't get them, I'll be like, come on, that was good. That was good.
Yeah.
This is not my fault. This is your fault. That was a good joke. I would be upset if I made a great pun and it went unloved. So then he keeps the comedy up by trying to explain the situation, shows that Sally is there as gold statue form. The furniture around is great. The couches are so perfectly vibed with whatever that like leather with the buttons kind of pushed in. I don't know the technical term. I'm not an interior designer. I don't own a fancy couch, but the couches look great. And then he is saying, I just wrote down some Hades quotes. Quote, typically getting crushed by a minotaur is a terminal diagnosis. Fantastic. Then when he wants the exchange of stuff, he says, you give me what you got and I gimme you what I got.
Yeah.
Great line. Then when they accuse him of being in cahoots with Ares, he goes, Ares, and then says, I seldom cahoot.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Then as he's explaining that he doesn't want the whole war to happen, which it's funny that I guess this kind of shows that they are kids and they didn't put anything together. Grover is saying to him, like, you want a war to happen. It's like, no, Ares wants the war. Come on, man. But they say, you want the war to happen. He goes, why would I want that?
Although I think in the book, this was slightly different because I think in the book, they thought that Hades wanted the war because he wanted more dead people.
Right.
And
correct.
when they get to the underworld, he's like, what do you mean I want more dead people? We're already like so overcrowded.
Yeah, I feel like that's a change where they didn't want to do all of the CGI to do a bunch of stuff because sadly, no skeleton army. Oh,
yeah.
Cast by the wayside. Because in the book, when they do the pearls, it's like they're about to get hit with the skeleton crew. But yeah, I think it's still like close enough. And I just think it's really funny that Hades is uninterested. He says these grudges go on forever, super unhealthy, which is great.
And I think the point stands of just like, why would I want a war? What are you talking about?
Yeah, it's really solid. And then Percy puts it together. And this is like the first true instance of us seeing Percy put something together. And I'm glad it came in the show because the conversation is still kind of happening and the camera is just stuck on Percy's face, and he's clearly processing, and then he realizes, oh, it's Kronos.
And then it zooms in on his neurons, and then he shouts,
God,
brain blast!
But no, he puts it together because of the war desire not making sense. And a big thing that he points out is that the voices from the dreams don't match up. Now that he's heard Hades talk a lot, he realizes, all right, you're not the person who's been talking to me in my dreams, and then puts it all together with Kronos. I think this is great. I'm really glad the show included this, because though I was kind of poking fun at that Instagram reel that I was referencing, I did hate in the Lightning Thief movie that Percy never figured anything out on his own. And I'm glad that we have Percy kind of putting some stuff together. In a comedic sense, we have it happen in episode 5, where when they're walking on the side of the road, he's like, wait a second, guys. And then they're like, yeah, Percy, we know. But now in this one, he does figure it out, because to Percy's credit in the books, he does figure some stuff out. Like, he's a smart kid. So I'm glad that they have that in the show. I was really happy to see this.
This is another change, right? Because in the book, he figures out that it's Kronos when he's back at camp, and he's talking to Luke about, like, why is he doing all of this? I think that's when he places that it's Kronos in the book.
I think so. I don't think he makes the Kronos realization. I think he just recognizes
that Hades is not,
that it's not Hades, and Ares was maybe working with someone else. And that's the question. I think he only just puts together Ares and Hades is not the combo. It's Ares and someone else. And I got to go get the helm back. Let's figure it out. And then they go on to figure it out. So then Hades says the line that is, I guess, reminiscent of the flashback, where Hades says, this only ends one way. It's just a matter of how difficult you make it, because this is when Hades has switched to actually give me the bolt, because I need to prepare to fight against my brothers now that they're warring and everything. I need this. And I guess that's what ties the whole flashback together, but I still don't love Sally yelling that at Percy. But then Percy decides that they're going to fix this. They're going to leave. They're going to get his helm back. And then that will make Hades want to return Sally. So when they pull out the pearls, then Hades goes, nice pearl, which is great. I loved how funny he was. It was really, really solid. And then Percy tells Grover to do the pearl thing. I really liked the CGI effect of the pearl, because they throw it on the ground and then just like a tiny little circular pool forms around their feet. And then you see it genuinely does look like Grover has slipped through a pool of water. I thought it looked really cool. I liked the effect.
I agree.
And then Percy does it as well. It seems like that's going to be the end of the episode, but it's not. It keeps going. We go back to the diner. Sally has left to go pay for the very fancy sundae that Percy has not touched. And then while she's up there, she lights a match and drops it in a finished ice cream thing. So maybe that was Percy's thing? Or maybe it was someone else's discarded sundae container that was just on the bar.
I ate Percy's. I ate Percy's.
God, yeah. They called you in and you walked by and said, are you going to finish that? And then had it. So then she does that to kind of talk to Poseidon. It instantly rains and the weather changes outside. You hear thunder. It's super cool. And then Poseidon comes in and they're talking. And Sally then gives a bit of an explanation that I had never really pieced together of why she really wants to get Percy at a different school. She says that him being in the city is attracting too much attention. And I realized, oh yeah, I guess if you're in the city, higher population, also closer proximity to Olympus. Like, I guess if you're in a more remote area, you could be safer from monsters. So that tracks.
That's why I live in the suburbs, is to be safer from
Just
monsters.
Keep her, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And Sally and Poseidon are going back and forth. And it seems like they have a good understanding. And it seems like they have a good, almost like a co-parenting sort of relationship, which is nice to see. Sally's saying like, oh, I got to bring him to camp, don't I? And Poseidon can tell she doesn't want to bring him to camp. And she says that that's true because she wants Percy to find out who he is before Poseidon's family tries to tell him who they want him to be. And I think that's a really, really good quote. And I like the sentiment here. I think this conversation does a very good job of just showing how difficult this whole situation is for Sally. And it's really helping the viewer recognize this is a really tough position for her to be in. Really tricky stuff.
Well, and I think that quote is in keeping with the theme of a lot of the season, right? Which is that Percy doesn't want to just assimilate into this world. He wants to change how this world operates fundamentally. And I think that what we're hearing here is that the reason for that is because Sally kept him from it for so long. I think that like all makes it click very well.
Yeah. And I think it's just laying the groundwork for what can be an overall theme of the entire show. And I think that this is an example of Rick has said that this series gives him the opportunity to take some of the things that show up in later books and put it into the original story now that he knows how the whole thing goes. And by the end of book 5, the whole big thing with Percy, what he wants from the gods, is for them to be better parents. And that does get very well established in book 5, but now you can establish it from the very beginning that Percy recognizes Sally's got it tough. And then that's also, you've got the Luke and Hermes stuff coming in episode 6. So I think there's more emphasis on the importance of improving the family dynamic between the gods and their demigod children. So I think putting more and more of that earlier on makes it clear why when Percy is given the opportunity to ask anything he wants of the gods, he picks be better parents. So I think that's another thing that we're doing here. But Toby Stevens' Poseidon is fantastic. His voice is so Poseidon-y. When I watched this with Kelly, she said it sounded like a storm over the ocean.
I don't know about that, but I think that it was very Poseidon-y.
Yeah, but I think it tracks. I mean, this dude is also from Black Sails, a show about pirates. So, he's got an aquatic sounding voice. It just really fits. And I like his vibe. Sally offers the ability for Poseidon to go talk to Percy. And he does look very conflicted, like he wants to, but he knows he shouldn't. And then it switches to a voiceover of Poseidon as we go back to where Percy is at. Percy and Grover are back on that beach. And Annabeth is there, helps them up. And then we see Ares is there. And we're getting ready for the fight. And then you have a voiceover from Poseidon saying, one day when he's ready, when he knows who he is and where he belongs, and fate has revealed to him his true path, on that day, I'll be right by his side. And then the episode ends and we know, oh baby, episode 8 is going to start with the Ares fight. And this was a big question that a lot of people and I were having, which is, all right, is Ares fight going to be episode 7? Are they going to put that into episode 8? Now that it's in episode 8 is about to slap so hard. It's about to be so good. There's going to be so much.
Yeah, wow. We have Luke, we have Ares, we have Olympus. Yeah, I'm very, very excited for next week.
A lot. It's going to be really, really solid. But this was a very solid episode of the TV show, and I think a solid episode of the podcast. Johnny, thank you so much for joining. This was a delight to have you back.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, this was really fun.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to promote to the world out there? Maybe your recent appearance on Meddling Adults with our good, close personal friend, Dara O'Brien?
That's exactly what I was going to say, is check out the Meddling Adults episode with our good, close personal friend, Dara O'Brien, who, if you don't know, is like the Jay Leno of England, maybe?
That is a huge disservice to Dara O'Brien.
Well, I don't mean talent-wise. I mean like fame-wise and like career arc-wise.
Right. Stand-up comedian turned into very famous host of television programs, now doing more stand-up in different television programs. Easily the most famous person I've ever had on a podcast. Wild set of circumstances that that we got to have him on Meddling Adults. But it was good. It's a fun one. Everyone should go listen to it. So yeah. Johnny, thank you so much for joining. Listeners, thank you so much for listening. And until we are back for the episode that will talk about the season finale of Percy Jackson and the Olympians season 1, please announce season 2. Come on, do it. Until then, I'll Percy you later.
Percy you later.
Percy you later?
Because earlier I made the Percy thing. And
well done. Yeah.
Because you see, Percy and Percy
and
sound
now
really similar.
Fades.
Yeah.
Hello. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Newest Olympian. This podcast is created, hosted, and produced by me, Mike Schubert. I also run the social media and the website. Our editor is Sherry Guo. The music is by Bettina Campamanes and Brandon Grugel, and the art is by Jessica E. Boyd. If you can't get enough of the show, you can find us on social media. We're at Newest Olympian on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and we're on Reddit as well, reddit.com/r/The Newest Olympian. And if you really can't get enough of the show, you can check out the bonus content for the podcast at thenewestolympian.com/Patreon. There's a bunch of bonus content. You can get exclusive merchandise, lots of fun stuff there. And if you want other merchandise, you can go to our merch store, thenewestolympian.com/merch. I mentioned the Patreon, so let's give a shout out to our producer level patrons: Kelsey Gillespie, The Damn Steve Nuggets, Vicky Garcia, Ellie Hoskovchova, Veronica Bartova, Frida Vikstrom, Megan Moon, Craig McRoberts, Taylor Payne, Sabrina Balsiger, Boney Pony, Polly Burridge, Nikki Harris, Tatiana Schmidt, Sandra Rose, Josh Sayer, Josh Wilkie, Abby Ryan, Ashton Gabrielson, Marco Redhouse, Sam Reeby, Riley Kiddes, Mary Kelly, Mrs. O'Leary, Milo Kim, CC Reeds 23, Sandkopf, Julia Kendall, Kendall, Ricky, John Drielsma, Rayla Matthews, Riley Draken, Luna Kadoon, Sky Mallory, Persasabeth, Aiden Parziani, Biggest Tyson Fan, Hunter Landstrom, Captain Jack Rackham, King Bastion, One Damn Distraction Coming Up, Ginger Spurs Boy, A Cup of Solace, Meg Roy, Lux, Neil, Olivia Krinicki, Mrs. O'Leary is Best Doggo, Bradimus Prime, Keepo Guy, McKenna Finley, Skylar Sisters, Demigod Nurse, Zachary Hamilton, Scott Sheldon, Sophie, Natanya Page, and Ann M. Thayer Cohen. If you want to help out the show in a non-monetary way, just talk about the podcast, whether that is posting about it on social media or reaching out to someone that you think would like the show, or just leaving us a rating and review on whatever podcasting app you are using. All of those things help. Spreading the show's existence via word of mouth is essential for the podcast, so I'm very appreciative to anyone who has done that in the past or will do it in the future. But I'm just so thankful that you tuned into this episode, and I hope you tune into our next episode where we'll be covering episode 8 with none other than Kelly Schubert. But until then, I'll pursue you later. Hey, how's it going? It's me, ASMR Mike. So when I record episodes of the News Olympian, I have a bigger, thicker windsock / plosive guard on my microphone, but my microphone also comes with a smaller one, which is good for video stuff because it doesn't take up as much room. But for this segment, I will be rubbing one windsock against the other windsock, and we'll see what the noises sound like. And here's some taps. Thank you for listening.